Welcome back to Ask Munro. My name is Carl, and we were asked to talk about an announcement or decision that Cadillac has made to add leather for the 2024 Cadillac Lyriq. Now, when they initially launched this vehicle, there was not a leather option. They had their own version of a vegan leather. They weren't calling it vegan leather, but this was mostly proprietary to them, and this was the option or the material that was going to be for that vehicle for 2023. Now for 2024, they have announced that they are now going to add more colors, and they're also going to add leather as an option. But this is kind of puzzling in a couple of different ways. One is the fact that for 2023, or at least for last year, they only sold a couple of hundred cars. So it seems kind of weird to have a material change after you had only built a couple of hundred vehicles. So I wanted to talk about some of the decision-making possibilities and some of the different points of view for this type of decision. And in doing this, I'm basically going to talk out of two sides of my face, two sides of my mouth. Depending on where you're at and depending on your point of view, you would have a different answer for these things. So first, from a consultant. Now, I have talked before about leather and the fact that leather is a natural material and it comes in the shape of the cow. With all of the imperfections, all of the problems, all of the bug bites, you have to deal with that material. So when we try and use leather, we have a poor utilization. We end up throwing away a lot of material in relation to what we would throw away with an artificial material. And it has a higher initial cost. And we talked about the processing. The fact that for an artificial material, I can lay this 10 layers thick, have one big cookie cutter die that has all of the shapes that I need, place on it, press it, and I could do 10 vehicles from that one run. Whereas with a leather hide, we either have to place individual cutting dies one by one across the hide, or we can use a CNC machine that's going to drag a knife and cut out every profile across that entire hide. Much higher cycle time, it would be much more expensive. So even though I like leather, if I'm a consultant and I'm consulting with an OEM and they say, look, we need to take money out of our process, we need to take money out of our vehicle, how can we do it? I would suggest fewer color combinations, and I would suggest for them to go to an artificial material rather than real leather. So that's from the consultant point of view. Then I'm going to talk about the OEM, the supplier of the components, then the supplier of the material. So the OEM's decision making. Now, when they launched the Lyriq, I am going to assume that they were a little fearful. They did not know how it was going to be received. Now, even though they were only able to build a couple of hundred vehicles, they have a long list of customers who are wanting to purchase these vehicles. And it's not just a customer like we would see for Rivian or Tesla, which some of those customers actually preferred the idea of a vegan leather. They saw that as a selling feature. A Cadillac customer, however, they have 100 years, more than 100 years now, of history. I'm going back to 1903. So there's a long history of Cadillac customers preferring to have a leather option. So from the OEM's point of view, they see a customer base that may have preferred to have an option that they were not offering. But then they saw the ability for profit. So this leather option is a nearly $4,000 option. So as the consultant, when I said that there's a much higher cost in the material and there's a much higher cost in that processing, think of it this way. Let's say it is $1,000, maybe $1,500 more expensive for the OEM to produce with that material, but they're selling it as a $4,000 option. So really for them, they're looking at a good way to get $2,000, $2,500 in excess profit per vehicle sold. All right, well, what about the supplier? The supplier that's actually making the seat. Well, for them, if they had the floor space dedicated with a clicker press or large press for punching out those materials, now they have to have a separate line in order for processing the leather. So whichever way they're going to be processing that material, if it's going to be a CNC cut or if it's going to be a die press, they're going to have separate space on their floor to manage that. Also, with leather, there is the possibility of needing a new pattern. When we look at vinyl materials and when we look at leather, there is a different stretch between them. They will behave differently in wrapping or in sewing. Sometimes it is actually necessary to make a completely unique pattern between leather and vinyl to account for that stretching. And we're going to have an image show on the screen where I show 3 vinyl samples. I had asked my prototype sewer to go ahead and sew these materials without using any alignment marks. And I wanted to see what the natural stretch was in the material. And you'll see how the one sample was about 25 millimeters longer, and the third was another 25 millimeters longer. That's the difference between the pressure foot, or the foot on the sewing machine, and the feed dog underneath, pushing the materials in different ways or in different tensions, causing that material to stretch. Leather won't behave the same way as the vinyl, so you have to plan for that. So that supplier now has to manage multiple materials, possibly a larger floor footprint. They're going to ask for more money, and they're also going to ask for more tooling and capital. But what about the material supplier? If I was the material supplier and I was selling the artificial material that GM is using for their vehicle, GM developed this material unique for their program, for their Cadillac vehicle. Now, when they do that, the material supplier says, okay, how many years is this program going to go for? All right, it's going to go for 7 years. How many are we planning to build per year? Oh, you're going to build 40,000 a year, 50,000 a year. All right, it's going to be 40,000 a year off of 7 years. How much am I going to be using per vehicle? You're going to buy this amount of material in total. I will give it to you for X price. So they made that negotiation back in 2002, back in 2021, whenever they were introducing that material for that vehicle. But now that GM is introducing a leather option, let's say leather is going to take over 20% of the vehicles sold or vehicles produced. Now that vegan leather supplier has just lost 20% of their possible sales. They're going to get upset about that. It all goes down to negotiation, and it's all a trade-off, trading off what the limitations for one material are, the benefits another, or the limitations of the other. It's a hard decision, and it's a decision that's going to affect hundreds of people just to make what would assume to be a simple material change. Nothing is simple. Nothing is just anything in automotive. On the marketing brochure, it might be simple to say, oh yes, we're simply changing between a vegan to a leather. But in all of the background and all the engineering and all the process and all the tool production, there is a lot that has to happen for that decision to make sense. So I don't know all of the decision making that GM has gone through for this. I'm certain that they have designed in their profit for that $4,000 option per vehicle. So hopefully they will do well with that profit, but it may upset the supplier of their seating or the supplier of their vegan material, which they have been developing. So thank you very much for watching. And if you are not subscribed, please do. Stay tuned for future videos.